Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of those joining us around the world for today's Green City Briefing. My name's Francesca Boyd, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of AIPH to today's talk. We've got some fascinating conversations coming up, but before we start, a little housekeeping. The video today is being recorded, so you will be able to access it at the Green City Forum. The Q&A function is available at the bottom, so should you have any questions come to mind as we go through today's talks, please do post them there so that the moderator is able to share with them in the Q&A section at the end. And if you would like to continue the conversation, we invite you all to join the Green City Forum to carry on the discussion and also see some of the incredible work that's going on around the world. So before we start, I would like to launch a poll to ask you about your current knowledge of the power of plants in helping climate change. Great, so just a couple of moments to fill that one in. And so may I also thank our sponsors and those who make today possible, the Worshipful Company of Gardeners, for their continued support of this series, as they supported us in the London series that is available online, and Doha Expo, which we have a short video from.
You are seed, the beginning of new awareness, a new global movement. You have life in you. Share it, spread it. Welcome to Expo 2023, Doha, Qatar.
It's fantastic that we're going to be hearing more about Doha Expo in today's series. Now may I introduce the MC for today's events, Mark Lawrence. Mark has an extensive history and expertise in the role of working in challenging climates and the way that plants not only provide us with enjoyment and pleasure, but also how they create whole ecosystems. So I'm sure today he will be able to provide some great insight as we carry on through the series. Thank you for joining us today. And now please may I hand you over to Mark.
Yeah, hello, and thank you, Frankie. And hello to everybody. I understand we have an audience from all around the world, and that's brilliant because this is very much a global topic. And I hope we'll get some insight today into the role of plants and horticulture in a rapidly changing world of climate disruption. It's certainly something that I'm very concerned with, and I think we've got two brilliant speakers here today that will show some very different aspects of the overall situation, and because I think the role of horticulture is changing rapidly, and it needs to move from being a perception of ornament into a role of ecosystem design and function, and because it's ecosystems that deal with the effects of climate change, that regulate or moderate climate change, and so we're going to hear about some fairly extreme examples from Doha, and also from the point of view of and the role of a botanic garden in how they approach these subjects. It's something I work in myself. My background is I'm a landscape designer, a horticulturist, an arborist, and I'm based in the UK, but I work around the world with green infrastructure, trees, and I have a particular interest in the Middle East, and I'm very interested in how we create adaptive landscapes, and how plants are going to, or our use of plants and our understanding of plants is going to evolve and change to help combat the issues of climate change, because this is a pretty critical thing that we have to deal with, and we have a situation where the speed of change on the planet is unprecedented, and climate zones are moving and shifting away from the equator at alarming speeds, far faster than nature can shift its ecosystems, if you like. So I think, we're going to find areas of the world, particularly, hot, arid areas particularly, become more extreme. And their climate zones are going to shift north and south from the equator to new regions, which will, and the plants in those regions will shift north and south from where they are in order to try and adapt and change what they do. So, but the main problem we have, though, is that plants move at a certain speed, and it's not as fast as man-made induced climate. Climate change is pushing things. The other thing is, of course, ecosystems have become degraded. A lot of seed dispersal mechanisms, for example, in forest regions, a lot of the seed dispersers have been diminished because of the destruction of their habitat. And so, a lot of the mammals that would disperse seeds over long regions and distances have gone. So therefore, nature's own ability to shift climate zones around is, on one hand, is diminished. On the other hand, it's encouraged by the fact that we move plants around. And I often think that nature uses us as a vector to shift plants around, but we do tend to have an attitude of thinking that any plant out of its native zone is an invasive species and doesn't belong there and should be eradicated. And sometimes that may be right, but I actually see these as pioneers. And I think a big part of the role of horticulture is understanding this pioneering and changing process and accelerating it. And the acceleration is really crucial, and it's crucial for one simple reason, and that is that nature will sort this out on its own, but it might take 10,000 years, it might take 100,000 years. It's rebuilt ecologies from scratch many times, ecosystems. But we can't wait that long, because if we live in a world that's ruined and is rebuilding from a low base, we're not likely to survive. So our self-interest is actually, as a species, is to help nature not restore itself back to the past. Can't do that. Tipping points have been passed, and they are not recoverable. But so we have to look forward to new, and there's plenty of lessons we can learn. And this is where places like botanic gardens, which are hubs of knowledge and are so valuable. And this is where also when larger organizations or groups come together in cities like they have in Doha to examine these issues and deal with them, these places are going to become really crucial sort of hubs of knowledge and information and learning, because we all have to learn new skills. How do we curate new ecosystems? How do we create what are called novel ecosystems, where they are combinations of existing plants and new plants that have come into, to, as some people see it, invade a space, but they're not. They're pioneering something new, usually in places that we humans have degraded. And this is a crucial subject. It's not, it's fascinating, but it's actually crucial, because it's crucial to the survival of ecosystems. We all know the stresses and threats and the decimation that's gone on, in different parts of the world that we've caused in such a short period of time since we've been industrialized. It's really sort of important that we gather momentum, shift beyond the sort of conservation of what was, and look forward to creating what needs to be, because at the end of the day, any ecosystem that works is going to be better than no ecosystem. And there are parts of the world that are going to struggle to have a viable ecosystem if we don't step in and moderate that. So our first speaker is Harry Watkins. And he is director of St Andrews Botanic Gardens, where he works on research, conservation and education programs, and they're based in Fife in Scotland. He has particular interest in the interactions of plants and urban environments under climate change. And I would like to welcome him very much as our first speaker, and I'm really fascinated to hear what he has to say. So over to you, Harry.
Thanks, Mark. Can everyone hear me okay and see the screen all right?
Yeah, we can see that.
Right. Well, I'll be talking this morning a little bit about what we've been doing in the Botanic Garden here in St Andrews. The question of how a botanic garden fits into some of these existential questions we're faced with has been a question that we've been grappling with really from first principles. And the questions that we've been asking are to do with how we can respond to climate change and these biosecurity risks that we're faced with. And I think that the center point of this kind of process that we've been going through and the answers that we're coming to relate to the botanic garden being much more a place of anticipatory work, somewhere which tries to forecast ecological dynamics and evolutionary behaviors, and less the place of like conserving individual plants. And this has got a number of implications throughout almost every aspect of our work. Now, we're here in St Andrews, and back in February 2020, if I can cast your minds back there, just before the pandemic fully exploded, at the Botanic Garden, we were faced with a number of challenges that were in many ways connected or linked to each other, but just hadn't been formally associated with each other, or at least they all related to each other in different ways. That related to the condition of buildings which needed updating, the types of plants we have in the garden and their arrangements, the mission shift in the garden away from being somewhere which was focused on botany and teaching and much more towards horticulture and leisure and tourism. And then of course, COVID-19 arrived in a much larger way in the UK. And as we looked at these problems, or challenges, I should say, we started to think about how can we treat this in a systemic way? How can we address each of these things in a way that identifies opportunities for the future and a new, repurposed sense of mission? So we started looking at these questions from an ecological perspective and thinking about our place in the world. We started using the Forestry Commission's maps and mapping tools to understand where we are in terms of a climate perspective right now and where we might go to in the future and where we might look for kind of reference habitats and ecosystems. And if we come into the garden here, this is really where many of our challenges were stitched together. Now, if you look in the middle of this aerial shot here, as we zoom in, you can see a couple of features of a botanic garden that lots of people might associate as being typical. Like, I don't know if you can see my mouse hovering over this area here, but this is a suite of order beds where plants are laid out according to their taxonomic understandings and their relationships. We've got here a large shrub collection. And then over here, we've got lots of glass houses. And these are all kind of features that are typical to botanic gardens in many ways, but for us presented challenges, or at least symbolized some of the challenges that we were faced with, to do with heating costs, to do with management requirements, to do with the pedagogical resources, or to do with the relationships between plants and how useful they were for research. So we started thinking about this in a way that forced us to maybe step back a couple of steps and think about, like, well, if we are going to design a new mission, a new arrangement of plants, a new landscape in this garden, and have that as the bedrock for the horticultural and ecological research we want to do, how can we look to ecological strategies as a source of inspiration and really apply them in a profound way to our thinking? And when most people think of kind of applying ecology to landscapes, you might picture things like this is a fantastic project by Dan Pearson's studio at Sissinghurst, or you might think of things like on the left-hand side here, work done by Sarah Price in the Olympic Park, or some of James Hitchmo's work with the Nefophias there in Oxford. But we really wanted to take a couple of steps back here and think about, well, what are the ecological drivers of evolution and what can we really learn from that? So just a very quick introduction to some of this. There are two main factors that limit plant growth, and they're stress and disturbance. And by stress, we mean the limit of a resource. So that might be in the root zone, it might be water, it might be nutrients, it might be frost at certain times. Disturbance means the removal of part of a biomass of a plant. So that could be through grazing, herbivory. It could be through disturbance in the root zone. If there's a plant growing on a riverbank, for example, and the riverbank subsides and falls away, or lightning striking a tree perhaps. And these map out in quite predictable ways, and you can look at different combinations of stress and disturbance, and low stress, low disturbance there, the worst of both worlds here, high stress, high disturbance. And plants over periods of time have developed strategies to adapt to these conditions that they might find themselves in. So if you've got low stress and high disturbance, woohoo, you're probably in something in Scotland quite similar to a cornfield perhaps, and poppies are fantastic exploiting this kind of territory, and their strategy is to live fast and die young and prioritize reproduction. Other end of the spectrum, like in say dune slacks and fixed dunes, we might see plants like junipers, where there's high stress situations and low disturbance. And the way that they win in life is by growing very slowly, very steadily. And nothing really wants to graze a juniper bush. Like if you look at how prickly it is, how dense the branches and the twigs are, and the leaves, where you've got low stress and low disturbance, this ecological strategy that wins here is about being competitive and delaying reproduction. And we've got an example here of a Paulownia tomentosa. And that's kind of what wins out when the living, is easy. And where you've got high stress and high disturbance, it's the worst of both worlds, and there's no real viable strategy for living. So what that means ecologically is that you've got to pick a strategy. No plant really can do everything. Plants can occupy different combinations of this kind of three-dimensional graph here. They can be combinations of different things, but you can't be maxing out on each of these three strategies. You've got to pick something. Now, plants, living organisms do this. They pick strategies that win in different environments. So annual herbs like the poppies you'll see there in the top left-hand corner, they tend to congregate around a ruderal strategy. Perennials, herbaceous perennials and ferns, they tend to do something in the middle. Trees and shrubs are ordinated somewhere between competitors and stress tolerators, and then lichens and bryophytes have these kind of opposite end of the spectrum, mirror image of specialist kind of behaviors. Now, applying that to a botanic garden, we have to think about business planning, think about landscape design, and so we started thinking about like how do other people do this? What do other organizations do? Like they may not do this intentionally, perhaps, but we looked at different organizations and models for operating and saw that, well, like business world, it does tend to fall into different strategies. Nike, for example, is an example of a highly competitive, highly effective organization. The Bank of England's been around, for example, for a very long time and is very risk averse in its decision making. And then you've got like the pop-up shops, the coffee shops, the clothes shops that appear on the high street and disappear. They do something for a short period of time, highly specialized, and then they move on somewhere else. And we thought, well, look, as a botanic garden that's facing these challenges, where's our niche? How are we going to respond to this? And how can we embrace principles of ecology and evolutionary dynamics in the very beginning stages of a thought process for a mission, for a landscape design that comes from that, all the education and research work and the conservation follows from it. So we identified 3 stages to this work. The first one was a process of removal. So that included turning off the gas into the botanic garden, decommissioning glass houses, removing those order beds that I pointed out earlier, removing the shrub collection and propagating it, and giving ourselves an opportunity for strategic design. And that was in this process, we looked at our niche and thinking like very clearly, where do we think our niche needs to be, not just now, but in kind of 30, 40 years time, thinking about the life cycles of plants, thinking about the rollout of climate change and how that's going to impact where we are in Fife. And then a process of staging and design, creating ecosystems in the Botanic Garden that reflect habitats that we see in Fife and that exist in different places around the world. So What does this look like? Well, in the heart of the garden, it's what we're calling a tangled bank of grasslands. Now, tangled bank takes its name from one of the last pages of Darwin's book On the Origin of Species, where he has this vision of ecology and how it shapes evolution. And that's been a profoundly inspiring section of the book for us and a reference point in many ways. And what we've looked at is creating then this, it's about 3.5, maybe 4 acres in the heart of the Botanic Garden that completely repurposes what we do here. It re-envisages what a Botanic Garden can be. And my hope is that it becomes also a reference point for designers, people working in urban design, working in urban horticulture, urban conservation perhaps as well. A reference point for people to be able to think about like how the ecological drivers of evolution are going to operate over the course of the next 40 to maybe 70 years. So we've got here 3 reference habitats that we see in Fife and that we see elsewhere in the world. We've got wood meadows here taking the place of the shrub beds, coastal grasslands and sand dunes replacing the order beds. And then where the glasshouses are and where what we're calling a biocene garden, which will be like an urban habitat in many ways, urban grasslands, urban forests, that all are staged in such a way that where we can introduce plants that are maybe related to each other, and we can look at how these plants move between these 3 habitats. They might be invasive, they might be naturalizing, they might be occupying much more fixed niches, but this then is a concrete setting for us to understand these dynamics and establish partnerships with other places around the world where these similar climates and habitats are found. So what does this look like? In the process of removal, it's thrown up lots of exciting opportunities for design. We had one very large glass house here, for example, a temperate glass house, where the glass was starting to slide off. So we thought the thing to do here perhaps is rather than take away the whole structure, let's take off the glass and turn it into a pergola. So we're putting wires up that lead over the top of this structure where we can grow climbing plants, and we can look at different ways in which different climbing plants spread over a structure like this and how they create a microclimate underneath, which is more shaded and controls the humidity. Completely different from a glass house and how that functions, where you want to get as much light in as possible and maximize the early season heat. It's a completely different dynamic and pretty cool from a perspective of teaching and horticulture. When we looked at the strategic opportunities, then we started mapping out the world from the perspective of a plant, getting a worm's eye view of the world as well, and to an extent trying to understand where in the world are there climates that we expect to see in 50 to 70 years time in St Andrews. So what does the medium term future look like for us? And then using these kind of hotspots around the world as sources of inspiration and sources of potential collaboration. So looking to where we can find perhaps partners, conservationists who are sharing, who have challenges that we expect to have in maybe 50 to 70 years, and starting to build up these partnerships so that we can address shared challenges and build forecasting tools to anticipate them. And then when it comes to staging and design, this is how it starts to pan out. Where there were shrub beds, we're now turning into this kind of wood meadow system. So silver pastoral, which as well has opportunities for us to kind of seats and chairs that we can see here, so places to have a coffee or enjoy the afternoon. But the idea is that you then put people right in the heart of this buzzing ecosystem where there are different phases of light, different phases of habitat that you are then immediately a part of. Where there were order beds with this very rigid understanding of phylogeny, and outdated, I should say as well, we now have sand dunes. So this is an example from the design stages that we went through early parts of last year, where we started to think, well, instead of like a very rigid understanding of evolution, what's the most messy understanding of evolution that we can think of? What's the most compelling example that we can think of that conveys dynamism? And of course, we've got fantastic examples just up the coast here of sand dunes. So we brought those into the heart of the garden, removed the individual plants that we had in these beds, and started making sand dunes with a boardwalk that runs through it. And here we've got examples of the team planting out marram grasses from West Sands. There's a beach just around the corner. And we now have boardwalk, which is fully accessible to all ages, that takes you on a journey through these different habitats of wood pasture and silver pastoral woodlands into the sand dunes. And it's pretty cool because you don't see sand dunes very often in the heart of a botanic garden, but it's very much intended to create this sense of dynamism and change. And instead of having beds where you have plants arranged in fixed ways where you kind of say, you're a hosta, you're an iris, you're a cotoneaster, we kind of say, here's the system. And we create the system, and then we let the dynamics unfold within that. So over time, plants will move from the sand dunes here through this gradient into the grasslands, the woody grasslands, I should say, and vice versa. Where the glass houses are and where we're taking those down, and we've got a phased transition here of kind of meanwhile gardens going into this urban landscape. And in this process, we're revealing landscapes, and it's dead exciting in a way. Very often landscape design and urban design goes hand in hand with building things. Like as a landscape architect, very often you're normally engaged as a way of facilitating a new building that's going in somewhere, or a new street, or a new urban development in some way. Here it's the reverse. We're taking buildings away to create landscapes. From a design perspective, that's hugely exciting and throws up all these opportunities. And this is a picture here from the summer as we're kind of partway through the decommissioning of these glass houses and using different combinations of annuals and perennials. This is, you can see here lots of dill and cornflowers and corn marigolds and flaxes, and they transition through the year. There are a couple of big things that we're finding along the way. So sure, we're creating habitats, but along the way, we've created a 95% reduction in our carbon emissions as a consequence of this kind of niche that we've identified and this kind of eco-evo approach to landscape design, which is hugely exciting. And I just wanted to share two other lessons really from this process that we've been going through. One is to do with the courage of conviction. It's been a really daunting process in many ways, creating this kind of scale of change in the botanic garden. But I think being clear about our priorities, our niche, being clear about what lessons we can draw from ecological processes has been really helpful and has helped us through this process. And then fundamentally understanding that trade-offs are key. Like you can do really exciting things, really new, bold ways of working can be found. But you've got to understand that trade-offs are going to be part of that process. And you can identify shared wins and co-benefits, but fundamentally, you've got to pick a strategy and go for it. And you've got to understand that new ways of doing things are going to present with them new opportunities and challenges at the same time. And understanding and accepting implications is difficult for organizations. If you go through this process, I think it can be profoundly helpful. So I'll leave that there and then hand over, and we can perhaps look at some questions and open the conversation.
Brilliant. Well, that was fascinating. Thank you, Harry. So we'll move straight on to a very different part of the world now, and we're going to hear from Francesco Roesler about his work out in Doha for the for the expo, the horticultural expo that's opening next year. So let's, without any further ado, let me just tell you that I believe that Francesco is based in London, but working out there, and is a an architect, landscape architect, and yes, so he's got some really interesting stuff, I'm sure, to hear. So let's hear from Francesco. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm gonna share my screen. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining this IPH presentation. And thanks for IPH for inviting me to present this very exciting project. I'm Francesco Roesler. I'm a lead landscape master plan designer at Dar Al Handasa in London. I'm currently based in Dubai for other projects, but I've been part of this design team for the Expo 2023 in Doha, Qatar, which now we're going to briefly go through. Just an introduction of Dar and what we do. So Dar Al-Handasa, it was founded in 1956 in Beirut, and today we have 47 worldwide branches and 5 permanent design studios around the world, mostly covering projects in Middle East. Today, we will go briefly through the journey that started 4 years ago now, and will culminate exactly 1 year from now in Qatar, where Qatar will host the first Horticultural Expo in the Gulf region. We will talk about the Expo theme and Qatar commitment in greening the desert, which is the main theme of this event. And finally, we will explore the Expo Master Plan, its key components, and the legacy that Qatar wants for future generations. So let's start with the road to Expo 2023 from Almer. That was the Expo that's just finished in the Netherlands, to Al Bidda in Qatar, in Doha. So in 2018, Qatar was officially awarded to host what was supposed to be at the time Expo 2021. In March 2019, Al Bidda Park was chosen to host the event, and the site work started almost immediately in March 2019. And at the end of 2019, it was already the beginning of the pandemic that forced Qatar to postpone the event to 2023. Earlier this year, in 2022, Qatar participated to Expo Florida. There was a great opportunity to showcase already this upcoming event in Doha. While the construction works of the Expo will keep going, but it was postponed to 2023. And in October, the 2nd of October next year, hopefully we're going to see the opening, the great opening of this unique event until March 2024. So in this moment, in October 2022, as we said, this was just the end of Florida. So while the Expo in Qatar was postponed, Florida 22 was still happening, and this was a great opportunity for us to design the pavilion that connected these two events, bringing a piece of Qatari desert and its vernacular architecture into the Green Dutch landscape. So the garden at the time was divided into 3 typical Qatari desertic habitats: the Rauta, or the sand plants, the Sabha, the salt flats, and the Wadi, which are these ephemeral river valleys. Even the name of the pavilion was inspired by the life in the desert. In fact, the name was the Desert Nest. Its architecture was representing the traditional Burj Al Hammam, or pigeon tower, and it was reinterpreted through modern and sustainable construction methods such as the 3D printing. And today, this is the tallest actually concrete 3D printing tower in the world. It's 12.10 meters. This vernacular architecture was reinterpreted in 4 different towers. We had the traditional Burj Al Hammam, the vertical farm, the energy tower, and the community tower. Now, why the community tower was very important in this expo? Because inside the community tower, it was the real connection between Florida 2022 and Doha Expo 2023. It was showcasing the master plan of Al Bidda Park, which you're going to see in a moment, and some panels, as you can see in this image, where people could start to touch base what we were designing and what is actually under construction in Doha. The existing Al Bidda Park in Doha was also executed by DAR almost 10 years ago, and is the perfect location for the Expo 2023. It's centrally located, and it's just 15 minutes drive away from the airport. And with its 170 hectares, it's one of the largest parks in the region. It's naturally divided into 3 areas and served by 2 metro stations. The park is also at a walking distance from the historic downtown and the Souq Waqif of Doha. It's a well-established park. It's very wide. It's these wide open lawns, wildflowers, meadows, and mature trees. It's important to know that when the park was designed and built, none of the trees was removed. They were actually, the main constraints was to keep all the existing mature trees in the park, so that when it was open, it was already having this very mature outlook. And that's why it was a very important commitment for Qatar to host the Expo in this park. It is provided also with a number of existing buildings and facilities, and these are all ready to be retrofitted to host the Expo program. And it's a colorful and blooming stage ready to host the visitor from all over the world. And this idea was to make the Expo more sustainable, because the aim of Qatar and the aim of Dar as designer was to leverage the city existing assets instead of building a new development area for the Expo. Qatar has also the perfect geographic and climate condition to host the first horticultural Expo about green in the desert. The aim of the event is to inspiring the visitors by promoting solution that promotes green life in the desert through 4 key pillars or 4 sub-themes of the Expo. So starting with the modern agriculture that is enhancing farmers' role, is bridging knowledge and technology, is ensuring coordinated solutions, and is promoting permaculture. Technology and innovation through a series of hands-on experience such as urban greenery, urban farming, but also advanced systems for rainwater harvesting and alternative energy solutions. And raising the environmental awareness through practices like affiliation, footprint reduction, and permagardening. And finally, sharing economy, social and environmental sustainable action during the Expo. The Green in the Desert theme comes from Qatar vision, its broader vision, and its broader effort to be an active partner in the system of international collective actions, seeking concerted efforts on ways to combat the desertification. Qatar, as we know, has a challenging climate. There is an acute lack of water and a limited fertile soil. And these constraints have pushed Qatar to adopt alternative techniques to manage resources and secure food. So systems like smart irrigation, sewage water, treating and hydroponic sewage water treatments and hydroponic have already reduced the water requirements in farming in Qatar by 70%, and this is already an important achievement. The Expo Master Plan will be staged to showcase the effort of each international participant, not just Qatar, in fighting back the desertification through sustainable practice. As we said before, the park is naturally divided into these 3 areas, and the 3 areas have been rebranded to host 3 character areas, which is the international area, which is the biggest with 70 hectares, the family area with 50 hectares, and the cultural area with other 50 hectares. The international area, which is the largest, as we said, is the real core of the exhibition. It will host 8 international indoor and outdoor gardens and pavilion, hydroponic cultivation, farmers market, food festival, and the Expo House, which is going to be the only permanent building of the exhibition. The design of this area makes use of existing infrastructure, existing buildings, and the existing landscape of the park, and is enhancing the park natural assets like the desert park that you can see in the northern part of the park, that today is the only urban natural reserve in Doha. The international participants will have to comply to a series of guidelines that we have contributed to develop with the Ministry of Municipality for the Expo. The guidelines aim to reduce the pavilion footprint in first instance, maximizing the softscape area and promoting the use of native and adapted local plants. There is a requirement of minimum 80% of the plot to be occupied by the garden, so by softscape, and the permeable, the hardscape cannot exceed the 10% of the plot. Sorry, there is a bit of a lag. Yeah. The family area, which is the second part of the park, is the central part of the park. We lost more like music and educational shows oriented towards kids and families. It also hosts other 25 additional sponsor and corporate gardens. And it's important to say that there are no permanent structures in this area. All the buildings, all the infrastructure, all the activities of the expo in this area will be an overlay of the existing park. And it's a space to gather and enjoy the mild Qatari winter season. And it's going to be like more of an immersive experience into art installations and thematic garden. And finally, in the southern part of the garden, we reach the cultural area. The cultural area, it celebrates the culture and the history of Qatar, the heritage and its local fauna. This area will host the largest event area that you can see in the southern corner, which is an area dedicated for larger festival and concert. And it also has some naturalistic trails where the visitors can enjoy horse riding and also traditional falconry performances. There are some existing assets also in this area, like the Doha Old Fort, which are going to be activated during the expo event. So now we go back to the northern part of the park, the international area, where we have the only permanent building of this exhibition, which is the Expo House. It was conceived and designed by Dar as a green hill. So the architecture is completely blended into the landscape. And among the other activities that are going to be hosted in this building, there is a media convention center, a rooftop cafe that you can see here on the top. There are outdoor exhibition space in the middle, and the hill can be used by the visitors to be seated and enjoy the shows. And there is a dry fountain in the middle that can be turned off during the events. It was designed more than 40 years ago in 2018, and this is how it looks like today. It's almost completed, and you can see it's embedded into this green hill. Dar has also contributed to design the master plan of the expo, but also some of the most iconic pavilions of the expo, like the one of the AIPH, which is one of my favorite actually, because it's all in timber and it's this semi-enclosed space in between two timber mesh, and is showcasing AIPH projects and program to foster future collaboration and educate especially younger generation, but also to raise awareness on green cities and sustainable living. So in conclusion, Expo 2023 will be the chance to discuss, share, and debates on this. This is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing in our times, which is the desertification. A challenge that we might overcome through international cooperation and technology innovation only. Al Bida Park will offer a great stage and a great chance for visitors to experience Qatar and Qatar landscape and modern landscape architecture and design. And the park, it's important to say that will be returned to the community after the event, together with all the facilities and the infrastructure. And while the pavilions, which are going to be all temporary, they will be relocated elsewhere, either in Qatar or back to their original countries. So many designers and engineers and specialists that have contributed to this ambitious project. Now I'm talking about this project, but it's been like a great team effort together with the Qatari government and the Ministry of Municipality. And we believe that this expo, which is the first in the Gulf region, will have a profound impact on Qatar, but also beyond in the region and hopefully in the world. And I would like to conclude with the message from the Secretary General Mohammed Al-Khoury, which is putting a lot of effort again on this project with us. And he's ambitious, and the ambition of Qatar is to host up to 3 million visitors over these 6 months in 2023. And so it's targeting to host about 80 countries from all over the world to showcase their practices in greening the desert and in design green cities in challenging environments. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Francesca. I think we managed to get the visuals on that quite well. It's a little bit jerky, it was for me. I don't know if it's my connection, but you could see the visual, ambitions of the site very well. So I'd like to thank you very much for that, and we will move on to Q&A sessions now. I hope I haven't cut in there. Had you actually finished? Was there any concluding remarks you wanted to say? Yeah. No. Okay. So if we can move on to Q&As and bring Harry back in, that would be great. So I think we've seen two really interesting and very, on the face of it, very different, obviously very different climates and very different regions and approaches, but obviously the common link here is plants and adaptation for climate change. So Francesca, I have a question for you, which is, I've noticed out in the Middle East the use of the term sort of native and adaptive plants is quite common. I noticed it's not really common so much in other more temperate regions, perhaps. And I use the term adaptive quite a lot, but it seems to be a lot of, it doesn't sort of translate into wider usage outside of sort of the Middle East that I know of. But I'm wondering what your take on adaptive is, and how much you're using it, and how you're sourcing native and adaptive plants for the project, because I know that can be quite challenging.
Yes, it is a big challenge indeed. And first, there's something we have to say, that Middle East and these like very fast developing cities like Dubai, Doha, and now Saudi Arabia, it's coming as well. They are facing at the same time a very fast development, which is happening during like the moment where climate change is really hitting the ground. So we as designers working on these mega projects sometimes, or even like smaller scale project, we notice how the policies in these countries are changing very rapidly in the use of plants. For example, the date palm that was like very popular at the beginning, like 20, 30 years ago in any projects in Middle East, now has been kind of scrapped from the list of the preferred plants in Middle East, because it's very water demanding. It requires a lot of effort to be and fertilizers to be grown. So there is a more and more growing awareness in terms of the plants that can be used. Now, a big problem is that a loss of the biodiversity and the loss of the native plants, especially, for example, talking about Qatar, has been lost over the ages. So it's very hard to repopulate the parts with the very original plants that are disappearing in the country. So what the country is doing in some project is like importing plants that could be adapted to the climate and to the specific environments of the Gulf region in general, while in parallel at the same time they are trying to bring back their native plants in the country. And this is happening also for the fauna, not just for the flora. They are reintroducing animals like the oryx from Africa, try to repopulate the fauna in the desert. It's a big challenge because the biodiversity it's very fragile in this context, and climate changing is making worse and worse. for example, when Al-Bida Park was designed and executed, there was the government of Qatar was very strict in using in like protecting or like relocating all of the plants of that site, the original site where the park today is. So almost all the trees that you see in Al-Bida Park today are trees that were there before, and those trees have been mapped when the park was designed. And there was a specific request from the municipality of Doha to implement the park with more trees and plants that were like exactly the same species that were already in Al-Bida. Of course, this is a very challenging process in the design.
I'll just cut in there. We're just running out of time. So Harry, I've got a quick question for you. In that, you know, obviously you're going through a great process of change with the Botanic Garden, which is fantastic. And how do you see the role of adaptive plants in your climate? And you've said about trying to anticipate what's going to be there in 50 years' time, and how do you see sort of ecology, ecosystems, if you like, developing and changing?
Tough question, that. It's dead interesting too. Because our habitats and ecosystems are changing, we know that. And I guess where I see the role of the Botanic Garden as being is less as a place to this Botanic Garden, I should say, less as a place for ex situ conservation, where we bring plants, keep them like they're in a museum for conservation purposes, but much more about working in situ or trans situ. Now, trans situ perhaps is then the link between that mission and what you're pointing to there, Mark, about adaptive planting. It brings in ideas of adaptive planting too. But I think the framing I'd use for this is to understand or to think of like a spectrum of plant behaviors in their habitats that they find themselves. So whilst you expressed a lot of reservation about the use of the term invasive, I think it's a very important term for us. They're not just pioneers. There are certainly plants which are pioneers and which are moving around the world, and they naturalize. And then you have plants which are competitive and which are perhaps more stable in their behavior. But I think when it comes to then the role of the Botanic Garden, again, it's in terms of forecasting, it's forecasting their behavior, forecasting where sources of invasive behavior might be. Botanic gardens historically have been places where people have collected lots of plants together. And I see that as a strength and an opportunity in lots of ways, but also a source of potential problems. Invasion debt is a very significant challenge for us as ecologists, as conservationists, land managers. And invasion debt is, if that's a new term to anyone here, it's a term which anticipates plants that might move beyond current physiological tipping points and change their behavior in their niche. And invasive plants, that term relates to plants which have negative impacts on their habitats. So forecasting when plants might become invasive and which plants might become invasive is a really important question to come to terms with. And my fear here with Botanic Gardens in this context is that we might be sources of invasion debt, plants which might jump the garden gate into nearby river systems or water systems or habitats. There are certainly plants which we can see naturalizing in the Botanic Garden here and starting to naturalize in nearby locations. Whether or not they become invasive or not is a really interesting question. And I think the role of Botanic Gardens in this context is going to be much more about understanding what's in the garden, what's in our Botanic Gardens, and understanding how they behave and how they're going to change in their behaviors and in interacting with habitats. It's a lot of fun there to be had from a research perspective and translating that into conservation.
Well, that's fantastic. I've got a whole load of questions. I'd like to spend ages talking to both of you, but actually we're running out of time. So they've been fascinating. I think we've just done tip of the iceberg stuff here, and there's a lot more to explore in these themes, and it's really fascinating to see how different parts of the world are approaching what are the same fundamental problems, but which get expressed through very different climates and conditions. And you know, I think you're both doing great work, and it's obviously ongoing. I hope the work in Qatar continues to develop beyond the remit of a park and into sort of you know, the wider ecological concerns for general system health and, you know, ecosystems. I'm sure it will, and in other parts of that world, because, you know, the climate out there is pretty extreme, and you know, the challenges are everywhere, are only going to grow. So I'd like to thank you both very much. We've, you know, as I said, we've sort of touched the tip of an iceberg, and you've raised some fascinating thoughts. I've got some notes here of things I want to research and go away and discover more about. Let's hope the conversation continues in many other ways. Francesco, I believe there are links to your video that other participants can see, you know, in full resolution later. But thank you both very much, and I'll hand you back to Francesca for sort of closing comments.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today. We've had innovation and sand dunes 70,000 kilometres apart, but really fascinating to see the power of plants and how they form part of that. So if we could now share the results of the polls, as I take the opportunity to thank our sponsors once again, the Worshipful Company of Gardeners and Expo Doha. Brilliant to see that there are many people here today who do know of good examples, and hopefully this has added more material to those thoughts for you. Do join us on the 8th of November as we travel to India to hear from the winners of AIPH's World Green City Awards. In the meantime, I'd like to remind you to sign up for our forum where we can carry on this conversation. Join us on Twitter, and also sign up for the Global City Update. Thank you everyone once again for participating in today. It's been brilliant, and I can't wait to hear what we have coming up in our next session. Have a lovely afternoon wherever you are. Thank you.
You are a seed, the beginning of a new awareness, a new global movement. You have life in you. Share it, spread it, bring your thoughts and skills. Make it all fruitful. Tomorrow brings challenges and opportunities. Grow. Grow the resources to embrace science and experience for global sustainability. Grow the tools and use technology to cultivate a new and better future together. Grow the knowledge to reconnect to nature and promote a greener development. Grow the balance between local and global, planet and people, today and tomorrow. Growth starts with you. Welcome to Expo 2023, Doha, Qatar. Qatar has the perfect conditions for this growth to take roots. From Doha, we can grow a green desert and a better environment. Our expo site consists of 3 main areas designed to host, gather, and inspire. Together we can sow the days of tomorrow for everyone to enjoy, everywhere. We are expecting you on the 2nd of October 2023. One expo site, consisting of 3 character areas, is growing now to welcome you in 2023 to the future of horticulture. are the seed and the movement that will gather the world in Qatar. Together in Doha, we will grow a green desert for a better environment.